Radnor Township Planning meeting. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'd like to start with the minutes from our January meeting. Do I have any comments on the minutes? If not, can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
May I have a
Second.
second? Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Okay, our first applicant tonight is SD 2010 S01 Final, Valley Forge Military Academy. Is the applicant present? I'm going to ask the applicant, Dan, to come up and just give us a 5-minute overview of what the application is, and then we'll turn it back to Dan. So the applicant can come up to the mic. I would appreciate it. Thank you.
We'll introduce ourselves.
Please.
I'm Mike Nolan, and I'm volunteering my services to Valley Forge Military Academy to come here and help them expedite it. And Dave Fiorello
Dave Fiorello from Momini and Associates.
is the engineer.
The Valley Forge Military Academy owns a large piece of ground, and it's, if you look at the key map, you can see the area shaded, includes portions in Tredyffrin Township, portions in Radnor Township. There are a number of residential parcels located on the west side of Radnor Street Road. There are a number of parcels there. Their existing parcels are separated by streets, but they're all part of the common tax parcel number for the Valley Forge Military Academy. Our original proposal that we had come in for was to separate the parcels out in order to give them each individual tax parcel numbers, and also to subdivide one of the parcels into 2 lots. There is an existing one parcel, parcel D at the bottom of your sheet, that currently has 2 residential buildings on it. They're used by the school. The purpose is to subdivide that into 2 separate lots so that there will be an existing dwelling on each of the lots. Dan Malloy, as part of his comments, noted that our parcel B, which is currently in the upper left-hand corner of your plan, which contains the headquarters house, is actually contingent with a parcel that's in Tredyffrin Township. He had a comment that if we had created a separate lot according to the township boundary, we would have some issues with setbacks because of the existing dwelling and a couple of the existing buildings that are actually would be over the property line. And you'll notice that in one of his comments tonight. We have agreed tonight that we will not make parcel B as part of this application. We will keep it with the rest of the facility. So what we are here with tonight is to create a separate tax parcel for parcel C, and for parcel D to create 2 lots out of the one parcel, and to give them each new tax parcel numbers.
All right, Dave, just help me. Parcel C is a vacant lot as we see it today.
That is correct.
Lot 2 of parcel D is 1 home?
Yes.
1 single family, and then on what would be lot 1 would be 1 single family?
That is correct.
All right, great. Thank you, guys.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Dan?
Okay, there were 8 comments from the Subdivision Advisory Committee, and I should have told Dave that there was an overall map of the entire parcel, of the entire property. So just to give everybody an understanding of where things are located. This is the area that's under discussion tonight, right here along Farriston Road and Radnor Street Road. Parcel A is shown as the entire campus in Radnor, as well as the portion of the campus that's in Tredyffrin. So as was pointed out by Mr. Fiorello, parcel B up here at the northern end of the property has 2 existing dwellings on the one lot. By putting a property line where the township line and the county line coincide, both of these parcels, or both of these structures, the house and the garage, would actually be bisected by the line. And the comment was either the line does not get installed or the line gets shifted far enough back where there would not be a nonconformity. So So as Mr. Fiorella just pointed out, they are going to keep parcel B with the rest of parcel A, which, as I mentioned, includes the tradition portion and the portion across the street. Parcel D is shown here. It's an L-shaped lot where they propose to add a property line shown in the dotted blue line. That would split each of the homes that are on parcel D. So my comment number one is what we had just discussed about parcel B at the top. My second concern was that the zoning table on sheet 2 should be updated to show the zoning information for parcel A. They have shown the zoning information for all the other parcels, B, C, and D, but not A. Item number 3 is referring to this sidewalk that exists on the property on parcel D. There are a couple of tripping hazards as well as some areas that are holding water and causing ponding and muddy surfaces, making the sidewalk hazardous to walk on. So I'm looking to have those issues corrected. Item number 4 refers to Lot 1, Parcel D. As it's shown right now, it's more than 40,000 square feet after the subdivision, which would allow it to be subdivided in the future. So I'm recommending, or I'm commenting, that the Academy should consider deed restricting lot to any further subdivision. Item number 5 refers to a note about raising the curb along Farrison Road. The note now says that they would raise the curb along Lot 2. My comment, the comment from the Subdivision Advisory Committee, is that the curb be raised along both Lots 2 and Lot 1 on Farrison Road. Item number 6 is referring to the house numbers. The house numbers are, I guess, for lack of a better word, confused. I'm looking to get those resolved so that if there's any emergency calls in the future, the emergency vehicles will have some consistency and be able to find the homes quicker. And items 7 and 8 is just a standard language concerning following rules and regulations of the township and entering into a financial security, basically escrow funds. That was it from the comments for the staff.
Dan, does the sidewalk continue through Lot D into Lot Parcel C?
Yes, it does.
And were there any issues with the sidewalk on that parcel?
It was a little worn, but it was not
But not,
unsafe.
Dan, is parcel C large enough to be subdivided?
It is not. It is not. This is what we saw about a year and a half ago when they split off this property. So parcel C cannot be subdivided.
It looks close.
It is close. It's a little bit short of the 40,000 square feet, and the actual number is 35,800.
if
And
Lot,
that has to do with the language we passed a couple years ago, where in residential lots, the right-of-way is netted out during subdivision.
so if Lot D were not D-restricted and were further subdivided, would there be 2 conforming lots?
No, the house, the lot line would have to be close to the back of the existing house. So it would make the existing house non-conforming, or the front lot non-conforming, if a line was put there. So there would either be zoning requirements, or the house would have to be raised and a new house constructed.
Dan, can you clarify, is this part of the neighborhood in the Harb?
It is not,
It is
no.
not, Okay.
Is there a house, or, I'm sorry, was there recently a house on Parcel C, or has that always been open?
As far as I know, it's always been open.
Dan, are any of these houses that are existing considered to be historic, even though they're out of Harb?
I'm sure the Academy can tell you the age of the homes. They don't appear to be that old.
I think they're late 50s, I believe.
Late 50s.
Dan, are there any other restrictions that occur to you that would prohibit the subdivision?
No, as it's shown here, both lots comply with the zoning code. You know, the impervious cover's not an issue, the lot area is not an issue.
Are there no planning subdivision issues other than those that you've identified?
No.
So could parcel C ultimately be a development site, Dan, for lack of better description? Could they develop parcel C as a single lot?
Yeah, it will be a home. It's zoned residential, so it will be a single-family home.
So it would have a curb cut either from Radnor Street, or would it come off of Ferriston?
The preference from the township would be it would come off of Firestone. We prefer to have the driveway on the lower volume road.
Okay, but your orientation would be that the house would sit, with setbacks, would probably be sitting in some similar configuration to the lot. I mean, you do have some setback issues there if it were to get developed.
Well, the building envelope is shown on the property. I mean, it does have 3 front yards. That's a front yard, and a front yard. So, you know, it has 1 rear yard and 3 front yards. So it is a long, narrow building envelope.
Right. But it right now it meets, it would be conforming to a development in the R1.
Yeah, this is zoned R2, but yeah, they could put a house on there.
Approximately how many square feet per floor, you know?
No, but there's very little impervious cover on the property now, so they could maximize the impervious cover and build a house, a pretty sizable house. It would be long and narrow. You have a scale, Dave? I didn't bring a scale, so I'm not sure what the width is. It's approximately 45 feet. This is 40 feet here, so it's similar.
Is that the setback outlined in the dotted lines?
Yeah, this is the building envelope.
Dan, I don't know this area real well. None of it's considered the new floodplain maps we got?
No.
It's far away? Okay.
Yeah, there are no streams in this immediate area.
Any other questions for Dan? Dave or Mike, we have you come back up and address the now 7 points.
Well, I think we have all of Dan's comments. I think we're agreeable to, I guess, everyone that I think probably Mike will want to discuss the deed restriction of Lot 1, Parcel D, but I think as Dan pointed out, that without the demolishing of the existing building, that lot could not be subdivided because with the areas and the setbacks required under zoning, a lot line would have to go in such a way that it would be, when I laid it out, roughly 4 or 5 feet from the building. So the yard setbacks would not be met. And I think the school wants to keep their options open with regard to the lot.
So at this point, is there any immediate plan to put these lots or houses on the market for sale, or what's the immediate plan, Mike?
No, the thought process is to be able to make them so that we could put them on the market. But we aren't sure, you know, if we put them on the market right away or what the timing would on that.
One of the things the board should be aware of, at least with Parcel C and the other parcels, is that they're de facto subdivided because of the roadways. It's just that right now, the whole academy, the Radnor Township portion, has one common tax parcel number. So the idea here is to, at least for planning purposes and to get things aligned for future, if it came down to it, is to create those lots with a separate tax parcel number.
Dan, let me throw this back to you. Once that happens, what happens to the real estate taxes here with relationship to the school versus residential lots?
Well, they would no longer be tax exempt. If they're not owned by the academy and they're owned privately.
So as long as they own them, they can subdivide like this. It doesn't affect their tax status. But if they were to sell like they did the one across the
I think what
Bears in
Dan's
there.
saying is right now they're tax exempt because they're owned by the
Right.
school. If the school decided to put them out and they were purchased by a private owner, then they
Then
would
would
be
change.
taxable.
Okay.
Yes.
One other comment, if I may.
Go up to the mic, Mike.
One
So
other
you're-
comment, if I
thank you.
may, is Mr. and Mrs. Higgins called us, and they live on the corner of Chestnut, where Dave's pointing his finger.
Right next to Lot 2.
And they would like to discuss with the school if the school would be amenable to selling some of Lot 2 off to them because of how narrow their rear yard is. So in order to accommodate that discussion, I had Dave take a look at where his proposed line was between what's shown as Lot 2 and 1. And Dave has been able to redraw that, to move that line a little bit closer to the house on parcel D, on Lot 1, which would then give us the ability to be able to talk to the Higgins and possibly convey to them some of the side yard of Lot 2. And in so doing, all of the parcels would be conforming with the current zoning.
What I have done with this plan that I brought, this plan, I've sort of gone through and addressed all Dan's comments on this plan. I know they're not before you tonight. They would be before Dan as part of the final approval. But what we did is we took the lot line between lots 1 and 2 and moved it closer to the east towards Radnor Street Road by 14 feet. That opens up Lot 2, gives Lot 2 some additional area that if the school worked out an agreement with the Higgins, they could be back before you with a lot line change to shift this lot line between the Higgins and Lot 2 by another 14 or 15 feet and still keep Lot 2 in compliance with the area and the bulk requirements of the code.
What would that do to the ability to subdivide Lot 1?
Lot 1 would still have more than 40,000 square feet. I actually worked out the numbers as it was shown here. That brings that up to 40,130 square feet.
But you're not asking for that tonight, you're just telling that's
Well,
in the planning
Well, I
stages.
guess we're bringing it up, I'm not sure what the procedure would be with the township, but, you know, we're asking if the planning commission makes recommendation to the commissioners that you might incorporate or address, and I don't know how you normally do that, Dan, but, you know, the fact that we're showing a plan to you right now that hasn't been formally submitted, but that shows the line being adjusted slightly.
Well, I think the academy doesn't want to have to come back and do this all over again, so,
the thought was
Correct.
here that if we made this change shown on this plan, the academy could come back instead of a whole new subdivision plan, could come up with a simple lot line change between 2 and the Higgins.
And Dan, you're comfortable with that?
I haven't seen the numbers that coinciding with the zoning. I have no reason to doubt what Dave Fiorello is saying, so I have no problem with the line being shifted.
2 lines, Dan, right?
Well, right now, it's only one line.
It would be the lot line between 2 and 1, and then we would come back later
Later.
at a time to change the lot line between the Higgins and what is Lot 2. That would be the subject of a separate application.
Okay.
Could you just give us maybe a forward-looking view of what you plan for the 3 parcels in question here? I mean, what do you, I guess 2 parcels, 3 lots, what do you see going on there, you know, as time evolves here?
Well, I can't forecast the whole future for you. Well, the school wants the ability to be able to have the ability to be able to market those 2 houses that are on what will be lots 1 and 2. Their intention is, at this time, is that if they do market them, they'll market them as they are, the houses, and they'll keep them as residential use, as they did across the street with 15 Ferriston.
Right.
About 2 years ago. Parcel C, they would offer that for sale too, then, if so disposed to do that. And that could be, you know, either a builder, someone could buy it for themselves and build a house, or somebody bought it for open space, then so be it.
Right. I don't live far from this location, but remind me, those two houses that are existing on lots 1 and 2, those are in the same kind of vintage architecture as the rest of the residential housing on the campus? They're
The other,
single-story,
or split levels?
split level,
I
right?
believe they were all built roughly around the same time in the late 50s, and I think it was the Slots were the builders, Norman and
Okay.
Aaron.
Okay, and were they built for the intention of housing academy staff?
Correct.
Okay. So the surrounding neighborhood, though, of Ferriston has houses that don't necessarily look like the two that the academy could be putting up for sale. Is that's correct? I mean, we're talking about a separate architectural style than what exists around.
Well, I think they're existing dwellings, so they
Right.
are, it's what has been in the neighborhood for the last 40-some-odd years, I
Right,
guess.
right.
So it's not changing the character of the neighborhood.
No, not at all, but I'm just thinking in terms of potential future development if they were to sell. Okay.
In moving that lot line on parcel D,
Yes, ma'am.
are you now going to be under the 40,000 to further subdivide that parcel?
We would be at 40,130.
So the answer is no.
Mike, while we have you up here, we saw the overall plan, I guess, back in '08, it was probably 2 years ago when we were talking about 15 Ferriston. Tell us any major changes for the entire campus at this point in time as far as your long-term plan here?
No. I know that there's been some conversation about Cabrini and Eastern and having conversations, and we've had conversations with them. We continue to. The school would just, if the school does anything, it would be to utilize any assets it has that, aren't productive for the school. The school intends to stay where it is right now. There's no plans, no intentions to move the school.
Do you file an annual or periodic development plan with the township as the other institutions do?
We do. 2008, I think, was the last one that Dan brought to our attention. It still needs a narrative, evidently. The plan was submitted, but the narrative was not. So that needs to be done. And I don't know, what are the requirements? How often it has to be updated?
It's every 2 years, or if there's a submittal of a new land development plan.
Okay.
But Dan, help me out. For getting these smaller parcels, we have the large parcel A, the large parcel B, which is the majority of that is in a different township,
Yeah,
correct?
if you look at the second page,
Yeah.
You'll see with this plan here that, I guess the majority
Thanks,
of the
Dave.
school proper is in Radnor Township. The Radnor Township, different township line is along this path here. It's along this property line here, so that pretty much the athletic fields and that nature and a couple buildings are in different township, but I would say that probably the bulk of the school is in Radnor Township.
So if the academy wanted to do anything on parcel A or parcel B, other than selling the entire parcel, would have to come back here, correct, Dan? Would have to come back for a subdivision?
yeah, based on what was submitted to me, parcel A is one lot.
One lot, okay.
So
And parcel
it-
B is one lot.
Well, parcel B is being absorbed back into what I'm calling parcel
Our
A.
application
stays one lot.
Our application was to make it a separate lot, but we're withdrawing that portion of the application to keep parcel B with parcel A.
Okay.
But if there was any other piece of the academy's property to be subdivided, they would have to come back to this board and the Board of Commissioners to get approval.
But Dan, they could, two questions. The 2008 periodic report, is that supposed to indicate any plans for development within or about, within the property?
I don't recall them showing any future building on the property with that plan submittal.
Did it, do you know whether it did, Mike?
I don't believe it did.
Or demolitions?
No, I don't believe it did. But the Sullivan Hall, I think, was already taken down at the time.
Right.
By the 2008, so it was removed from the plan. But I don't believe the plan showed any future building at the time.
Now,
We were invited to a presentation that was given by the academy that showed, I think it was an academic building on parcel A that is surrounded by Radnor Street and Walnut Avenue. Is that still projected or
Well,
potentially
it's a
considered?
plan that we had done, and it's still a possibility. You know, at this time, we haven't got the funding for it. The concept, I believe, that was shown to you was building some college facilities over on that parcel.
I think it was a single building, but
Yeah, I think it might have been an academic for the college.
I have a question. Do you have a pending application of similar in any way to this in Tredyffrin?
Oh, no, we do not.
Okay.
No.
Well, would that be interdifferent, Dan? If it's all one parcel, if they want to do something in the northwest corner of the athletic fields, would that come here, or would that go to Tredyffrin?
That would go to Tredyffrin.
Okay.
The one thing the board should be aware of, we're talking two different counties, two different municipalities here. There is a separate Chester County, Tredyffrin Township tax parcel number for the portion in Tredyffrin Township. There is a separate Radnor Township, Delaware County tax parcel number for the parcel in Radnor Township, Delaware County. So, I mean, and again, it's for assessment purposes for taxation. There is a separate tax number for Tredyffrin, and it's separate from the tax number from Delaware County. So when it comes down to development, I guess it would come down to which municipality and which county the actual development is in that would need the land development approval.
Dave, having said that, the exception to that is you saw today was parcel B, where there are structures that cross over both townships, both counties. And so that they would involve or require the involvement of both municipalities. So we have the school has no intentions of selling that house, so that it was, the best way to solve that problem was to remove it from the application.
Our original idea was, since it was separated by the municipal boundary as tax parcel numbers, we would create its own, but because of the overlap, we thought it best to keep it with the overall tax parcel and to avoid any issues.
Any other questions?
Dan, if the school wanted to build an academic building on, somewhere in parcel A that did not involve a zoning matter, would it have to come before us for approval? Would that fall within the planning code?
My understanding, that would be land development.
Yeah, it
Have
would-
to go in front of the board.
It would have to come before the.
Yes, it would have to come back. It's not residential, it would have to come back.
If it were a dormitory, would it have to come back?
Yes,
Because it's institutional?
yes.
All right.
Public comment? Come right up. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Sonia Cohane. I live at 20 Farriston Road, and my husband and I have lived there for 33 years.
Where is that on, can you show us on the map easily?
Here,
Back there.
on the curve.
Oh, this one.
We back up to Church of the Savior property. I have a question about something that's vague, and I'm sorry it's vague, but it's something I remember from a long time ago when Valley Forge had talked about possibly developing the land that's on the south side of the parking lot, the main parking lot, which was below the mansion house that was just taken down. And they were told that the density of what you call parcel A was mitigated. The high density on the other side of Radnor Street Road and Eagle Road, the main part of the campus, was mitigated by the open space on the south side of Radnor Street Road, or Eagle Road. And that any diminution of the open space that's there would throw them into conflict as far as their density. And that includes, I would assume, all of the pervious surface and the buildings. Now, if that's the case, and these current lots under consideration are in fact still part of parcel A until they're subdivided, is that a consideration? I mean, is that something that you need to know or we need to know before they go ahead with this? Because that is a significant amount of open space there. My second question is,
Why don't we address them one at a time?
Okay.
I'm going to ask Dan if you can address how the calculations were done and if these lots were in fact in that calculation.
That was my one comment about including the zoning information for parcel A. I find it hard to believe that splitting off that parcel C is going to throw the whole campus, the 54 acres, out of whack on the impervious cover.
And having Dan, I'm sorry.
Okay, let Dan.
Yeah, so I have not seen the actual numbers related to parcel A. I did speak to Dave earlier today and told him, that's what I was looking for in my one comment, comment number 2.
Dave, go ahead.
I have checked those numbers, and they are on the revised plans. Of course, you haven't gotten them yet, and they will be submitted to Dan. But the current parcel A, when you look at parcel A as it stands, is a net area of 71.3 acres. The current impervious cover is 26.37%. And this being the PI zoning, plan institutional zoning, my reading of the ordinance allows an impervious cover of 45%. Now, the one thing that I'm pointing out here is I'm just looking at that parcel A, and that doesn't include the areas on the west side of Radnor Street Road. So currently, everything with the area and the impervious coverage, and we'll give them to Dan for him to verify, but they appear to more than adequately meet the zoning requirements.
So Dave, when you said the 71.3 acres, you're including all,
I am not including B, C, or D.
okay, you're not
And-
including B, C,
And
or
I'm
D.
not including the Tredyffrin Township portion,
Gotcha.
all in Radnor.
All in
yes.
Radnor, parcel A.
And how about building area? Do you have a number on building area?
I did check the building area, buildings. I didn't do the percentage, but the building area was 276. So it appears to be, I'd have to do the math, Dan, but probably on the order of maybe 18 to 20%.
Okay, and the requirement is 30, no more than 30.
Well, with the total was less than 26, including all the roadways and parking areas and everything else. I'm sorry, of the total, the buildings is roughly a third of the 26%, so that would put it on the order of 8 or 9% for building coverage.
So to answer your question, then, I believe what Dave is saying and Dan is saying is, as this is calculated, there would have to be enough land remaining on parcel A to support the existing buildings plus any expansion. And every time they would come in for any expansion, this would be recalculated.
As it stands now, then it's not affected by this subdivision? Okay.
Correct.
Looking at this map, do you not own this property right
Can you
here?
talk into the mic, ma'am, just so we can have it recorded?
It looks to me like there's something missing of your property in Tredyffrin, not
This
that it's
corner here.
pertinent. You do own that.
According to this plan, we do, and I'm glad you pointed it out. It appears that the plan is incorrectly drawn.
Right.
That I will have, I calculated,
I mean, I know that piece of property, and
Okay.
you've owned it for years.
and I will double check
Okay.
that.
They're
This corner and-
separate parcels, there are 5 lots that are up at the
Oh,
corner
okay.
of Radnor Street Road and Upper Gulf.
Where you have the sign.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's probably why they aren't shown.
Okay.
My other plea, I guess, is that over the years, Valley Forge has had a lot of different plans to do different things to raise money. One was an ice skating rink open to the public, but that was going to be on the Tredyffrin portion. They were going to sell off this portion right here at one point for development as residential. They did sell this section of Farriston Road that you know right after the movie was made, or right before, actually. It would be helpful if the school could have some forward-looking plan so that it appears to me that pieces are being chewed off of their parcel A. a little bit here and a little bit there, and so on and so forth. Is there any way that they could let the neighborhood know? There is significant acreage in North Wayne. Is there any way that we could know and you could know what their plans are going forward? I mean, if they're talking to Cabrini, what are they talking about, and what is the possibility? They already have Cabrini students housed on their campus. If, in fact, I heard a rumor that the property south of the parking lot here in Parcel A might be sold to Eastern College for some structure. If these things are in the plans or in the works or desirable by them, could we not know these things as they go along so that we could not be surprised by them when they happen?
The short answer is they would have to come back in front of us if they wanted to do any of that. If they wanted to subdivide off a piece and sell it, let's say, to another institution or to anyone. So depending on where you are living there, they'd have to give you a legal notice. Now, I don't know, and I'll ask Mike if you can step up. I know there was a breakfast that we were invited to about the overall plans of the campus. But Mike, can you address what you're doing with the neighbors? Because, it's crucial to us, the neighbors get along. And if there's something, obviously, if someone comes to you and says, you want to sell the campus, we don't expect you to come up every day and tell all the neighbors, we got a guy that called us. But what are you doing in general with communication with your local neighbors there?
Well, I think that the school has done that in the past, as you had said, where they'll have discussions and bring groups together.
We haven't been together with you to hear anything within 5, 6, 10 years.
Okay. But, the problem is, things change all the time. And our school has had a relationship with Cabrini and Eastern. We share the parking lot we have on the piece that's south of Eagle Road. Eastern and Cabrini use that parking lot along with us. We have worked out an arrangement there. Cabrini uses a ball field that's all the way up against, adjacent to their property that backs up to St. David's Country Club. So we've always had some reciprocal on it, and as Sonia points out, there's a house, a residence that was used for the Cabrini students because they had a need for students. So we're always having conversations back and forth. So other than give you what we feel like that day or what we're thinking about, but we don't know if we're going to do, it's difficult. So that's the reason I think for the long-range plan is to be able to come in and show something that we're thinking of as a snapshot for that day. But things change all the time, especially with the economy and what we've been going through. I mean, it's like a major change in terms of everybody's focus on.
Is it odd that since these plans have to be submitted, or an overview of your ideas submitted every 2 years, that these kinds of things would not be in the works 2 years in advance?
Mike could answer that question better, but
I mean, I hadn't heard, I don't know about the Cabrini.
2 years ago,
Tell me about the
weren't thinking of
Cabrini
it.
thing. I mean, what's the Cabrini issue? And if it's in your mind, or if it's an idea, would that go into your plan so that it would be available to the public?
I don't know the answer to that, because if it's not the conveyance of a piece of property, or if it's not the building of a structure or something of that nature, I don't believe that normally shows on the plan. So, where they park some cars on a parking lot we have, and we worked out an arrangement with that, I don't believe that shows on the plan. So, it's difficult to inform all the time, because a lot of times, there are ideas that are being explored. They aren't necessarily, commitments that have been made.
I would say-
Could we, I'm sorry, could we consult with Dan a little bit more on the biannual plan, if that's the right term? What are the requirements for that plan? Is it more precatory than detailed? Is it, suppose an institution formally adopts a long-range plan by its governing body, as most institutions do. Is that particular plan supposed to be submitted to the township? And beyond formal plans, what are the separate independent requirements of the township filing?
Well, I'll find the exact language, but basically it's every other year, the plan is to be updated and submitted to the township, or when a new plan is submitted for some land development or subdivision for the property. But it's basically, it's what we've been discussing, where any proposed development or construction is to take place on the property. They're supposed to show us a plan with that information, include verbiage that basically gives background on the history of the school, where things, what has happened through the progression of time, and what is proposed.
And in Valley Forge's defense, I don't think they're the only institution that haven't been current with their long-range plans. And we've
You
been
are
hearing
correct.
this
Yeah.
consistently with Villanova, some other colleges and universities. What is the lever that we have to have those plans submitted and keep them current? It seems like we've talked about this, at least in the 8 years that I've been on the planning commission. Is there any, we're talking about institutional uses, predominantly parcels where there are no tax requirements of the institutions. What is the lever that we have?
Well, I would say probably the lever is me. I should not have accepted the application without the long-range plan. I mean, that would make it very clear that until the long-range plan is submitted, I won't accept their application.
But they're not the only offender here. I mean,
I agree.
And I suspect it's not necessarily clear, Dan hasn't found the ordinance yet, but I can just imagine a host of questions about how detailed that report is supposed to be, and what it's supposed to include, and whether an institution which is considering a great number of options, and frankly, in negotiation with its neighbors over various options, would want to keep as much of their long-range plans that might affect those negotiations or limit their options sort of secret or not public. And so I can't imagine that ordinance provision lends a great deal of guidance. But I suppose the intent is that the township could sit down with the long-range plan submitted by Cabrini, Eastern, and Valley Forge and begin to develop a sense of what might happen over a 5-year or 10-year period. And I suspect that's the purpose of it. When you have a chance to look at it, maybe you can give us some guidance. And I suppose we can also ask the applicant what your plans are, what can you share with us. As the chairman said, the relationship between the institution and the neighbors is of paramount importance to us, and whether or not you're legally required to tell us something, or whether you're in compliance with a technical provision or not. The more you can tell the neighbors, and the more questions that you can ask, and they can ask and you can answer before one of these hearings, when there's a very short time period, when plans are in motion, the better. So I think you've indicated that you have no public plans now to do anything with any part of parcel A or B. Is that correct?
That's true, and we don't have any plans for any structures on it. As I said to you, we've been in conversation all the time with Cabrini and Eastern about utilizing usages.
Is it generally the case that they want to utilize some of your space rather than the other way around?
It's been both, but yes, mostly Cabrini and Eastern wanting to utilize our space. In fact, Eastern would like to, share the chapel and some of the ball fields too. So we have those kinds of conversations. There's a synergy there. I think the good news is that we're talking about institutional, that it's same for same, and that, it's all being used in the same manner that it's being used right now. It's not a drastic change. Like if we were to come in and ask for a rezoning to residential to change the nature of a parcel we're using, that would be a significant change.
Can I just say, from a resident standpoint, what you just said is not exactly the way I would look at it. If you're saying that your ball fields and whatnot are being used by other institutions, then the intensity of use goes up. And therefore, we can be subject to the kind of parking snarls and difficulties on our street that we have had for 30 years, because someone's coming to a big ball game that may not have anything to do with the academy. And I have had people tell me, I think it was Mr. McGeorge, when there was a function at the academy that was not an academy function, they had leased their property to someone, that there wasn't anything they could do about it because it wasn't an academy function. And I said, that doesn't make any sense to me. You leased it. You know, you should have rules written into your contract that protect the neighborhood. And we've been asking them to do that for a long time. And it's spotty at best. Better than it has been, but we would have meetings in the past. If you remember Mo Hennessy, when he was chief of police, would come to the neighborhood and sit down and talk with the neighbors and the school and try to figure out what we were going to do about the parking situation on Farriston, because it was dangerous at that point. So that using like for like sounds okay, but when you're raising the number of people using one area, it creates traffic and other problems, especially if no one's going to take the responsibility for who's in charge.
Well, I think as to intensity of use, we were in here, Valley Forge was an application for a dining hall.
Yes.
And during that, I believe you
Yes.
raised the issue that
We
you
had
felt the
long-
traffic was too heavy on Eagle Road,
Right.
and that the entrances that were being utilized there by Eisenhower Hall, that it was not safe or appropriate, or that you preferred not to have that kind of traffic or cars stopping and being used on that road, and I believe the school accommodated you on that. That
We asked at that
Those gates were
point-
used much less than they ever were.
Well,
I think, let me interrupt, I think rather than go back and forth, I think the
Okay.
point is made. I'm going to ask the audience, we have about 30 people in the audience, just by show of hands, how many are here for this application tonight? Just, so most of the 30 are here for that. So I think it's very important. I think, number one, having this many people out shows, thank you, shows the institution how important it is to communicate with your neighbors. And like we said, legally, they have to come here for anything that's going to occur. We've had these issues at Villanova where someone else is using the field at night, and whether it's lights or traffic or noise, you know, again, all we can do is help work that communication and try to be good neighbors. So I appreciate your comment. Thank you, Mike, and I'll ask for the next. Anybody else from the public to come forward?
Ed, while we're waiting, can we just mention, we talked about the long-range land use plans that come in, hopefully every 2 years, and hopefully that'll be updated. But I think it's important to mention that those aren't binding
Right.
in any way. Even, you know, they're helpful, they're informative, they can help with planning, but, you know, economic times can change very quickly. You know, direction of an institution can change, and we just need to be aware of that going forward, that it really is, as Ed said, only when things come to the township that it's something that we can act on. The long use plans, they're helpful, but they're not binding in any way.
Sir?
Thank you. Good evening. My name's Steve Palantoni. I live at 206 Walnut Avenue in Wayne. I'm a neighbor of Valley Forge. I'm also the chair of Radnor's Comprehensive Plan Implementation Committee. And a couple of comments. I apologize. It's not directly related to this application, but it is related to Valley Forge in general, about the planning process itself. I've had the opportunity of sitting on the Planning Commission here at Radnor for 8 years when I was involved. And one of the worst things that has happened is when plans come in disjointed. You never really get a full idea of really what the impact is. You get something maybe 6 months later, even a year later, you get something else, and you can never really see before and after of the full impact. And unfortunately, that's the way it is. But there is a section in the comp plan, Section 8, it's institutional use, and along with the zoning code, the recurring theme is the cooperation with neighbors and the impact with neighbors and how important that is. And I think the institutions are getting that a little bit. What I think has to happen is not groups of neighbors, but all the neighbors have to be invited to a meeting. So if there's something, a certain group doesn't get invited, but send it out just like you do with whatever the recommendations are for zoning, X amount of feet within a property, and I think that way everybody's involved in the process, which is extremely important as well. This area is pretty unique because you have Valley Forge Eastern and Cabrini all abutting each other, and although it is institutional, Valley Forge is a little bit different than the other two. It's kind of a benign institution. There's no cars on campus, lights out at 10, whatever you have. And so as a neighbor, it's a very, very good thing because there's not the 10 o'clock class at night coming out or whatever the case may be. So it is a little bit different in that regards. So it would be good, and I think John touched on this, and something I think is a good idea, that all three of the institutions, those three anyway, should have their long-range plans submitted, all Mylar, overlaid, so you could get a full impact of that whole area and where plans are to be and so forth. It was almost on the Planning Commission, the idea of the long-range plan was a good faith thing. Now, obviously, if there's business deals and negotiations, you want to keep that in your hip pocket so you get the best deal you can. But if the situation is we're going to build an academic building here and we have it all planned out, we're missing $10 million. So that's a little bit different. They have a plan, they have it in their thought process, and if certain things come into play, this will happen. If the enrollment is 3,000 and in 10 years we plan to take it to 3,500 and therefore we need a dormitory, but 15 things have to happen. They probably won't, but if they do, by the grace of God, this is what it is. That's the idea of the long-range plan so everybody can take a look at it. And I think it's extremely important that we all look at that now, and if there's a plan for some building, but you need $10 million, whatever the case may be, it should be out there so that everybody can have the idea of now what that full impact is. And when I was chair, one of the things that was the most important to me was, of course, you had the engineers and the attorneys, and everybody knew the ordinances, and everybody knew setbacks and percentages of impervious and so forth and so on. But the most important part of the whole puzzle is the people that were there 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. They knew the stormwater better than any engineer. They knew the traffic better than any engineering traffic. They knew the history, which really helped in the planning process. I don't think anybody here wants to restrict anybody if they're legally have the right to build something. If you're allowed to do it, you're allowed to do it, but there is a way to help make that better. And it really should start now with these three institutions to really come forward and say, this is what we're planning. There's a lot that have to happen, but let's take a look at it globally, and we'll see all three of them. It should really help out. So that's, I think, all I needed to say. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Ma'am?
Hi, my name is Colleen Price, and I live at 352 Shimoni Road. I'm also a neighbor of all three, Valley Forge, Cabrini, and Eastern. And I think I want to reiterate what everyone has said here tonight. We definitely need to have a group and have more contact with the three institutions. Because as you can hear from what's going on now is the institutions are sort of using each other to get around zoning issues. Eastern University has a deficiency in parking. They're at least 75 to 150 spaces short. They know it, and they go and they lease space from Valley Forge. Now, I don't think Valley Forge has a right to turn their parking lot into a commercial lot and lease to other institutions. I know it's been going on. We've been allowing it to continue, but it's something that Eastern really would not be able to take on these extra students unless they could go and use Valley Forge's facilities. Same thing's happening in Cabrini. Cabrini has gone and taken some dorm space from Valley Forge. Well, had they come to the Planning Commission and said, we need another dorm for more of our students, you may have said, hey, wait a minute, we have to go through planning, you may need more parking. It just seems that as Valley Forge's numbers dwindle, Cabrini and Eastern are just going through the roof, and there's really no check on what's going on there. So I think the three of them really do need to get together with the neighbors and really disclose what their intent is. Because what we've heard is pretty strong rumors is that Cabrini is going to buy a portion of Valley Forge and Eastern may buy the South Campus, or at least a portion of the South Campus. So we'd like to be apprised of what's going on and really hear it from the three of them at once. Thank you.
Sir?
My name is Mike Packer. I live at 30 Farriston Road. I had a couple questions, if I could, clarifications. We went through the parcels and there were a few questions, and I think at times we were talking about different parcels. So could we go back to one of the previous pages? Sure.
Mr. Packer, where's your house?
Oh, I'm
on
sorry.
this property?
30 Farriston Road is back here at the end of the U. On parcel C, I think it was stated that is just one lot that cannot be subdivided. But
That's correct.
But then somebody mentioned a number of square footage there, and I don't know at that point if we were still referring to parcel C, or if the conversation at that point had switched down to lot 1. So does anyone have the square footage on parcel
Dave,
C?
you
And
35,800, I believe.
that's the one that's 35.
C, 35,800.
Okay, thank you. And then lot 2, I think I understand what we're saying there, but if I understood correctly, lot 1, if the structure was raised, that could be subdivided into 2 lots?
That's correct.
Okay. The only other comment I have is I don't know if the township has given any consideration to actually purchasing the parcel C as part of the township's open space program. I have no idea what the process is for that.
I don't know.
The first would be to have some money to do that.
Okay.
I don't think the township has the money.
I
Mr.
agree.
Malloy maybe can speak better to that.
Well, I would suggest you or the neighbors send a letter to Mr. Martin. He's the interim township manager. And that would be the first thing. Certainly contact your commissioner about it. They would be the 2 suggestions.
Okay. Is there a formal process in place, I mean, other than what you're suggesting here?
No, there's no formal process.
Okay.
No.
That's all I have.
Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Jim Higgins, I live at 501 Chestnut Lane, and Mr. Nolan did mention that my wife and I have had discussions about acquiring a small strip of land on the side yard of lot number 2. It would be the west side.
Filed your annual plan?
No. But at some point, if everything goes okay and the academy is willing to convey that to us, we will come in with a request for subdivision. But I'm really up here to talk about parcel C. And I'd like, I know this commission does not have power to make acquisitions, but this is sort of an educational pitch that we want to get the Board of Commissioners thinking about saving parcel C. Parcel C is, in my judgment, one of the gateways to the township. If you are coming down Radnor Street Road, come over the hill, the chapel is on the left, and the first thing you see as you cross into the township is this lovely, Hank Mahoney calls it a lawn. It's the center of, well, it's a gateway. It's a gateway to the township, and on that property is a magnificent tree. It must be, Sonia, how old? 200 years old, 175 years
It's
old.
one of the old maples that used to be on those properties, and it's still there.
This parcel really should be at the top of the list of the township's open space fund. And I know we don't want to get into a discussion of proprietary information, but the academy is certainly wants to maximize their return at some point on the value of that land. And so you can't fault them for that. They're going to want to get top dollar. But the township needs to be thinking about that. I've spoken to Hank Mahoney about it. He in turn has spoken to Elaine Schaefer, who is the new commissioner from the 4th Ward, and she's head of the Open Space Committee in the township. I think between the 2 of them and the other 5 commissioners, we ought to make something happen on that. That's my pitch.
Thank you. A final comment? Sir?
My name is Craig Church. I live at 17 Farriston, which is right next to 15 Farriston, which is right there. I'm only one house away from parcel C. And I have a major concern with the rezoning of parcel C along the same lines that Jim Higgins just discussed. Basically, I believe the action to split out parcel C, it will likely be developed in the future. There's no doubt in my mind, even though the long-range plans have not been revealed yet. I believe that will totally change the look and feel of the entire neighborhood. you have to realize right now that Parcel C is a playground for 15 young children that have just moved into that neighborhood over the last few years. And Jim described it, but that is a beautiful, big tree. The kids climb on that tree, they play on that tree, and you simply cannot appreciate the beauty of that Parcel C by looking at it on this map. And, you know, I moved here in 1996 myself, and one of the major reasons was the beauty of the open spaces in Radnor Township. And I'm very dismayed that we're slowly getting rid of those open spaces. So one purpose, hopefully, of the Planning Commission is to preserve open land for the common good of the people. And I ask you to consider how the Open Space Fund could be used to preserve this or otherwise delay, possibly by the fact that this proposal did not have the long-range plan submitted in it, like you said, was a requirement in this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
My name is James Heldring, and I live at 34 Ferriston, next to the Packers, which is in the back of the U, in the kind of back corner. I'm going to state what's probably the obvious, that all these people are here because they're concerned about a relationship we have with the military academy. And I've been there for 20 years, and I would describe that relationship as a good one. I think for me, they have communicated what their intents were. They don't always know what they're going to be long range, but to the degree they know what's going on, I think they've told us. And I think they've made an effort to be good neighbors, in my opinion. Clearly, we're here because this neighborhood views this proposal as a deterioration of the neighborhood. And so I'm stating, not questioning, but I'm stating that as a neighborhood, we want the township and the military academy to understand that we view it that way. And if relationships mean anything, they should know what they're doing. And I'm a businessman, I understand they're businessmen. We understand that. If relationships count, then there is a development of open space, just like the township views purchasing open space as a benefit for the community. We view that open space as a benefit, clearly our benefit more than anybody else's, but a benefit for all, and that's why we are here. And if I speak for everybody, if anybody disagrees with me, they should come up, but just so I'm on the record as saying why we're here.
Mr. Heldering, does your concern for the possible deterioration of the neighborhood include a concern that the homes on Lot 1 and Lot 2 would be sold into private use, or is your concern merely the possibility of the development of Parcel C?
Now I'm going to split off because I don't adjoin those properties, and so the people that adjoin those properties might have a difference of opinion, but it was touched on earlier that the two houses that exist are not attractive houses. There's no way they're attractive houses. So there is at least some of us, including myself, who would view the sale and renovation or redevelopment of those as a plus to the neighborhood. I can't speak for people adjoining, but I would view it that way. C, clearly.
All right. One more. Two more.
Hi, my name's Leslie Bowes. I'm a resident of 1 Fenimore Lane in St. David's. I am sandwiched between Eastern and Valley Forge. And, I think the neighbors would all like these institutions to remain successful and viable because we would prefer, we like them. And we'd prefer that to a heavy, intense development. But I just want to say, when we're talking about getting neighbors to working well with neighbors and working with neighbors, I'd just like to suggest that a lot of people seem to be interested in retaining the openness of Parcel C. And I just want to remind everybody that it's not always purchased. Open space isn't always purchased by a township. Development rights can be eased, and easements are frequently donated by the owners of property, so that the military academy could retain ownership of the parcel, but donate an easement so that it won't be developed in the future. And that might be something that the neighbors would really like to hear if they're looking to make other changes. That could be a good bargaining chip. So I just wanted to remind everybody of that.
Thank you.
Dan, when does the open space, we have an ad hoc open space committee, how often do they meet?
I would have to double check.
They're meeting on February 17th.
Oh, somebody just said they're meeting February, oh, Julie, you said. So that would be a good opportunity, a good venue for neighbors who have concerns and ideas, and Mrs. Bose has a possibly a really great one that could be a win-win for a lot of people. Would be that open space meeting?
Dan, is there any provision in the statutes for transferable development rights?
Not specific to our code, but certainly in state code there is. So it is something that can be done.
It can be done here without further action?
Well,
or would it require some action of the commissioners?
I think it would. Well, I don't know if it would. I don't know if it would require action by the commissioners.
Do we have recent precedent for that you can think of?
Not transfer of development rights, but certainly putting easements on land, deed restricting it to further subdivision. That's been done certainly with the Radnor Conservancy and the Brandywine Conservancy. So there's lots of history there, but not so much transfer of the development rights.
Dan, if you're thinking about balancing the parcel A in its entirety, if we're making a decision tonight on parcels C and D, how would that be weighed down the road if there was, say, an intense development planned on the southern part of the campus? I mean, we're basically granting a subdivision tonight, but what if they came back to us and said, we want to develop an academic building six months from now? Does that doesn't have any impact on these three parcels, would it?
Well, you're talking about the open space or the impervious cover ratio or the building coverage ratio?
Sure.
Well, without seeing the actual numbers, but based on what I heard earlier from Mr. Fiorello, I mean, it seems like they have a pretty long way to go in order to meet those requirements. So I don't think that these, I mean, certainly parcel D that already has 2 homes on it already has a fair amount of building taken up and impervious cover. So if they were vacant lots, I would say, well, maybe there might be some issue there, but the fact that they are basically developed out.
Right.
We're really talking about Lot C, and it's only 35,000 square feet. It's not a substantial amount of open space to add to their numbers.
Dan, could you clarify how a development on parcel B affects at all our consideration of C and D and vice versa? How would C and D be impacted at all by a development on A? They're separate parcels.
The deed that was submitted with the application was fairly vague. I mean, the only thing that was broken out separate was parcel C. Everything else that I can tell from the 30 or 40 pages was it's one parcel. Now, I know Chester County has a parcel number and Delaware County has a separate parcel number because the numbers are completely different.
Well,
I don't know that they are actually 2 different lots.
That may be my confusion. I thought I've heard 2 things, Mike. Is what's identified on the map that's now being viewed as C and D, are they in fact now part of parcel A?
No, they are not.
They are separate. Let me clarify that. Yes, they are as part of the tax parcel. There is a common tax parcel number for all the holdings of Valley Forge Military Academy and College in Radnor Township. However, when you look at the areas, in Parcel A and Parcel B, I've broken them out separately.
Well, for purposes of the zoning and...
One thing to keep in mind with the zoning, that the area on the west side of Radnor Street Road is zoned residential. The area of the remaining portions of lands owned by the military college in Radnor Township are planned institutional.
In making any of the calculations required by the zoning or land use ordinances, with respect to Parcel A, would any of the land on the west side of Radnor Road be considered?
I'm not sure I follow the...
Well, I'm trying to determine what relevance the land on the west side.
Well, the one thing you have to consider is that if this subdivision or if this change or whatever we want to call it went through, the academy, if they came in with any type of development in the future, would be bound to whatever area they have left, so that any impervious requirements or any zoning setback requirements, building coverage or whatever would be based on the holdings that they have.
I'm trying to get a handle on what now exists, and whether C and D are now considered for purposes of the, and maybe Dan can answer if he knows.
Well, I think I'm going to answer different than what Dave was starting to answer. When I looked at this, the only thing that I saw in the deeds was Parcel C was broken out separately. So when I reviewed this, I looked at Parcel D as part of Parcel A. Even though it's across the street, there are some zoning codes that say a street divides a lot. We don't have that language in our code. So when I looked at this, I looked at Parcel D is part of Parcel A.
And
C is separate.
the numbers that I had gave to you earlier, where I broke down the area of Parcel A as the 73 acres, that area is on the east side of Radnor Street Road. It doesn't include the couple of acres that are on the west side, if that clarifies anything.
And your calculations are such that with respect to A, there's so much.
And when I did those calculations based on A, I was looking at A as the holdings on the east side. I didn't include the other
All right,
pieces.
and that there was sufficient tolerance, for the lack of a better term.
Yes.
That these parcels really didn't have a bearing, whether or not they were included.
That is correct.
Okay. And you agree, Dan?
Yeah, I think that these are so small compared to the rest of
All right.
the property.
Okay.
There's minimal impact.
I have a question about the deeds or deed. You're saying that there is a separate deed for parcel C?
There is a separate deed for Parcel C, is because one was created when there was a subdivision of this smaller piece off 2 years ago.
And then the deed, so the recital of parcel D is in some other deed that refers to property on the other side of the street?
Yes, it's all one big mess.
And you're saying that there's no need to subdivide Lot 1 from that much larger deed across the street? Because it seems like that would be another subdivision in effect.
Well, in effect, I guess we are requesting to subdivide that piece out. I mean, it's almost a de facto subdivision because it's separated
By a
by
street.
streets and right-of-ways. However, I guess, to be clear, it is all part of one big, and I have to call it a mess. It's a very awkward legal description that goes back 80-plus years, and it is extremely hard to follow. And this would clarify things, at least on this side.
And just out of curiosity, is parcel B, the description of, I know you've withdrawn it, but is that parcel in the deed, again, on the property across the street?
Yes, that it's all part of it.
Okay.
Dave, correct me on this, but there's a reason that it's a mess. It's a confluence of all the different deeds that were acquired
It's
and all the
a
different properties
conglomerate.
for a period of time.
Nobody created one separate overall deed description of the whole holdings. Every time the school acquired a piece, they added a subsection to the deed and said including such and such, and it just went down the road for years and years and years.
Dan, or gentlemen, can we create some kind of restriction here, just to clarify that? I understand that everybody says there's plenty of wiggle room here with regard to impervious and building limits and all that, but, without the long-range land plan here, to imagine a time when you might be getting close to that and you haven't yet sold this land, what I don't want to see happen is a situation where you're allowed to use this land as a calculation for some project on the east side of Radnor Street Road.
I don't think that would ever come down, because by creating this and creating separate deeds for this, they would be netted out of everything else, so that
Okay, great.
the net result would be whatever's left.
It would make it perfectly clear that these properties are detached.
Right.
They might be owned by the academy, but they are detached from the main campus.
So no longer part of a calculation for development on the east side.
Yes.
Right.
Great.
If anything came up in the future where they wanted to do that, they'd have to rejoin the lots together.
Right,
Which-
but approving the plan tonight would give the military academy the right to go and sell these parcels. I mean, this would have there would be no restrictions upon them if we approve this application.
That's correct.
That's correct. And we haven't even seen the lot line change for Lot 2.
Well,
The one
again,
that was
lot
discussed.
line, and that's something that has to be worked out with the Higgins, that would come back as a separate application. It would not be part of this. All we're saying is we're creating enough area as part of Lot 2 that if something were worked out and it would facilitate a lot line change, that would have to come back in front of you again.
No, I know that, but if we approve this tonight, these parcels can be sold off as soon as they're recorded. I mean, they have the right to do that.
Yes,
Correct.
that's correct.
All right, I think I had two more public comments. I saw two hands. We'll take the last two public comments, either one. Let's come forward.
Hi, I'm Virginia Brookins, and I live at 907 Eagle Road, which is adjoining parcel Lot 2 and 1. I've lived here since 1981, and I have to say that I have not had probably a good relationship with Valley Forge Military Academy, because I have really never been notified of anything that's gone on. And I have to say this truthfully, in the almost 30 years I've lived here, I hear about these things kind of second hand, and things happen. For instance, behind me, a shed was erected right about a couple of feet from my property line by the house at number 16, but I never knew anything about it, nor do I think it was ever, a permit was ever granted by Radnor. It just appeared one day. And I left the academy. I think it's a beautiful piece of property, and I do want to reiterate my support of keeping parcel C as open space if we could possibly. I hate to think of that being built on. But I would think it would be wonderful if Valley Forge really could be more receptive to informing the neighbors of what is going on. For instance, in this subdivision application, I understand that it was filed with Radnor almost a month ago, more than a month ago, and yet we never received the letter until the final day that they could send it to us. Not enough time to really know about it. And it would be helpful to know these things a little ahead of the fact. And my other question is, I wanted to know if the right-of-way along Radnor Street Road here, on parcel C and on lot 1 or parcel D, does that that amount of land, the right-of-way, is that included in the acreage of the lot? Or in other words?
No, it's netted out.
It's netted out?
Yes. So on the second sheet, parcel C has a gross area of 42,000.
Gross area and a net area. The gross area is to the actual title line, which does go to the center of the road, but the net area subtracts out the right-of-way, and the ordinance is based on the net area.
Okay. And the other thing, I just heard that someone say that up here on the panel that if this subdivision application was granted tonight, that would there not be any restrictions on these properties being sold? For instance, let's say parcel C would be sold, would you not have any restrictions, for instance, if someone's going to erect a house on there, to putting driveways in on Radnor Street Road? I mean, it's an incredibly dangerous road now. The traffic is terrific. And I would think that you would set up some kind of restrictions on the sale of property.
I think Dan did answer that on
Did he?
parcel C.
I missed that.
Yeah, that they would want
I know
the,
you said something at the beginning, but I didn't hear it.
Yeah, our preference under the subdivision code is that any driveways come out on the lower use road, the road that gets less traffic.
Lower use. Okay. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Well, let me just add, ma'am, keep in mind that this body doesn't have the power to approve anything, but simply to make recommendations to the Board of Commissioners.
To the Board of Commissioners.
The Board of Commissioners would approve it.
And then does it go on from there?
No,
That's-
Board of Commissioners has the final determination on land
And when
planning.
is that meeting?
Well, the next meeting of the Board of if it's approved tonight, it will be at the Board of Commissioners next Monday.
And will we know if it's approved tonight, or we
You're
just-
going to hear a vote shortly.
All right, thank you.
last comment.
My name is Lisa Packer. My husband has spoken here this evening. We live at 30 Farriston Road, which is at the top of the U on the outside. He asked several questions. I have one or two, and then I have a comment or two. It sounds as though my first question has already been answered, that being, are you prepared to render a decision this evening? And it sounds as though the answer is yes. Am I correct?
We'll have a discussion after we're done.
I see. I guess then, for the record, I would like to request information on what would be required for us to stay a vote so that we have an opportunity to consider the information from the Academy and from this organization that we've learned here this evening.
And what, I'm not following what you're asking, a stay to,
Let's not have a decision tonight. What can we do to allow the community to sort of take in what we've learned this evening?
remember, like John said, we're only a board that recommends, and if it was to go forward, would it go to the commissioners? And they're really the decision makers. So we're really looking at this application as, does it fit within our code and within the law? And can we give any comments that either says this doesn't fit, it needs variance, we send it back to a different committee, or we pass it forward and we can give our comments and say it meets code, and here's some suggestions.
I see.
So your real yay or nay is going to come at the commissioners.
I see. I thought it was wonderful to hear that parcel C is deeded separately. And for the record, I think I speak on behalf of all of our neighbors that should, in the name of goodwill, the Academy opt to deed that over to the Township for open space issues, that we would embrace that with great joy. In terms of the community right around Farriston Road, I just want to reiterate what's been said about the community itself and what that land there. The Academy's been gracious to allow the children of that community to use that property and use that land, and they have a great time on it. And we've seen in the 10-plus years that we've lived there the real coming together of the community as the neighborhood is turned over, with more and more children coming into the place. And that is a central meeting area. It would be very unfortunate if that were to not be part of the Radnor Township community going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Discussion? Any other questions? Dan, timing on this application? Let's start there.
Yeah, you have another month. This is the first time through.
Skip?
What I get from this is, though, that parcel C is its own separate thing, and actually, the only part of the application that we're considering is whether or not they can have their own tax bill. I mean, it's already, there is a deed, it is done, they could sell it tomorrow, right?
parcel C.
Parcel C. So the
That is
only,
correct.
the only thing we're going to pass on with regard to parcel C is whether or not the academy can have a separate tax bill as to C.
Yeah, that's going to make, that's going to clean up some of the confusion. But yes, C is a separate parcel.
It has its own deed, it just doesn't have its own individual tax bill. And that's the burden of the taxing authority, to create a tax bill that's appropriate, but,
That's right. That's something that Delaware County would assign to it.
so really the issue is whether or not we're approving perhaps a double, depending on how you view it, subdivision of D. Because B has been withdrawn as well.
Correct.
Correct. Okay.
Well, Dan, I'm now confused. I was pretty certain that the application before us tonight included C and D.
It includes C, but I think it only
Well-
adds to taxing.
You may be right in substance, so the question is there anything for us to do with respect to C?
I don't think that there is, no. I mean, it was dealt with a year and a half ago when the lot number 15 was split off of it. But C is described as a separately deeded parcel, but it
So-
does not have its own tax.
So it's
parcel
an
number.
extraneous part of the application.
I would say that's probably a good way to describe it.
And so the only action that's appropriate for us to take tonight is with respect to D.
Well, D is certainly the most visible portion of it, but also your approval of C, I think, is what is being asked of you. So,
What can
Well,
we
let me state it another way. Suppose we approve the application tonight. What effectively, or recommend approval, what effectively does that mean for C that doesn't exist right now?
well, the application that was submitted to the township said a 5-lot subdivision. So it's parcel A, B, C, and D gets split into 2. So that's the information that will be forwarded on to Delaware County. Now, B has been withdrawn, so in effect, it's a 4-lot subdivision. So it'll be A, C, and 2 Ds. So,
I'm concerned about an unintended consequence of a recommendation for approval of the application with respect to C. If it's the case, as it appears, that a recommendation of approval would have no effect on C, then I guess it has no effect on C. I'm just concerned about an unintended effect of a recommendation of approval that I can't visualize now. Somebody help me out here.
I don't-
To clarify that,
I don't think we should be voting on C at all.
Well, I agree it's cleaner that way if in fact,
I don't think we have authority to, I don't think they're doing anything to C, except changing their tax bill.
yeah, I don't mean to split hairs here, because, so that if we're not doing anything to see, whether we include it or not.
That's not not my understanding. My understanding is that if we were to vote on this and approve it tonight, they started today with A, and they're gonna walk out of here with A, C, and D is gonna be lot 1 and 2. They're gonna walk out with 4 separate lots, that in theory, if it was approved by the commissioners, could be sold as 3 residential lots somewhere in the near future. So I do believe, and Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, we are absolutely talking about creating C as a separate lot, that it's not today.
But I guess my understanding is that C is already a separate lot. Whether, and the real question is, should you even be asking us to approve C? Because it seems like it's more a taxing authority issue than it is a planning commission issue.
It could be, I think, in the sake of keeping things clean. I know when we came in here a year and a half, 2 years ago, and subdivided off the other Ferriston Road piece, we looked at that as a subdivision of that parcel because it was surrounded by the roadways, and we were looking at it as a separate piece. And I think in order to keep it clean, since It has the same tax parcel number, and it's probably looked as, and has been over the years, looked at as part of the overall campus, is to keep it clean. And even though there's a separate deed for it, or a separate description for it, I think this would make it clean to state that we are actually making a separate lot.
Well, let me, Mike, when this went down to Delaware County, did you get 2 tax ID numbers or 1? Did Lot 15 come back with its own parcel number? And
Lot 15 came back with its own tax parcel number, but everything else stayed the same,
Then it's still part of A.
which means it's still part of A.
Lot 15, to those that weren't.
Lot
is the
15
Lot
is
is the
this.
house that was
Yeah.
subdivided off of Lot C. 2
So
years
then
ago.
C is still part of A.
Yes, that's
Yes.
the position we're taking, to keep
Okay.
it clean.
Dan, let me ask you a question. Did this go to preliminary plan approval? I mean, not.
No, this is the
No,
first time through.
we've seen it.
This
Okay,
is-
so
this-
then, let me, for the sake of argument here, the conversation about parcel C for a moment aside, if we take C out of the plan, and they've already taken B out of the plan, really what we're talking about is a recommendation to approve parcel D, and within that plan, they're already talking about doing one lot line change tonight, which is the lot line between 1 and 2, and we haven't seen the calculations for those. You told
No,
us the
no.
numbers.
What we're asking for tonight is to create Lot 1 and 2 with the possible lot line change in the future with the adjoining Higgins property.
No, I'm sorry, I'm not being clear about the lot line change I'm speaking of. I understood you earlier tonight to say that in the plans you were
Okay.
holding over there, you wanted to move the lot line between 1 and 2 tonight,
Yes.
14 feet to the east.
Yes, okay.
In order to, in the future, accommodate a possible agreement with the Higgins.
Correct,
So really
correct.
what we're talking about is the one portion of this plan tonight that we are all clear needs a recommendation or not, already has problems with it. It's the first time the public's seeing it. It feels it feels a little rushed, to Mrs. Packer's point about allowing the neighbors to digest it. That's my only comment.
One thing I wanted to point out, it is a minor final because it's less than 5 lots and there's no development, and that we're entitled to come in as a combination preliminary final. And we're only asking tonight to accommodate one of the neighbors is, and I think I pointed out to you and showing you the numbers, that by moving that lot line over the 14 feet, we're still in compliance with all the rules and regulations. And I think Dan could, address that as part of his final review before the plans are recorded. I think we're up front tonight and telling you what we want to do.
But you'd have to come back, I thought you said, to actually implement that.
If the
Right.
board, or if the school came to an agreement with the Higgins,
Which it is not yet done.
which it has not yet done, we would only be dealing with Lot 2.
Understood. But
And a
you-
lot line
You would
change
have to
with the
come back
Higgins.
with respect to that change.
Yes,
Yes.
that would be a separate application.
But not to belabor this, but the applicant is looking for parcel C to be created into a separate lot, so that
Correct.
it's perfectly clear.
Well, I have an unanswered question of whether there's an unintended effect of including C if it's already a separate parcel. I can't imagine.
I'm missing your point, John. What's the unintended effect?
Well, I don't know what the
They're asking
unintended, I
us-
mean, that's by
But they're asking
definition.
us they're asking right now for that to be a
But-
lot. There's nothing unintended, I don't believe. They're
Well,
asking for
you-
that for once and for all to be a separate
I'll
lot.
accept that point. It's clear that they would like us to include it, to remove, to include it, I guess, to remove any question as to whether or not it's a separate parcel.
Any ambiguity of the whole thing,
Right.
because you're raising this way, it's, everything's up front and clear. At least I hope it would be.
Well, I'm,
It's kind of what we asked for a year and a half ago, when they wanted to take 15 away from C, and we said, why don't you just look at all these? And they said, no, they weren't ready to do that. They only wanted to remove the house on number 15 from A. Now we're seeing, they are asking us to clean up this entire side of the street and create Lot 1, Lot 2.
are you saying
D, and C.
that a separate deed should not have been created 2 years ago? Because it was
I'm just
beyond the
saying-
scope of the.
No, I'm just saying that you could have guessed, a betting man probably would have guessed we'd see this again, and we have.
I mean, the other thing that I could envision happening is the academy could contact Delaware County and say, we never received a tax ID number for parcel C, and we want that issued. And Delaware County may just turn around and issue a separate tax ID number.
Question, how many deeds do you have?
I think this just makes it cleaner.
Sorry, but I thought you had 2 deeds, but then Dan said you only said you got 1 deed back.
Well,
so-
we have 1 deed for the whole parcel with a separate description, and maybe that's the issue, is a separate description, Dan, for parcel C as part of that?
Dan, do you see any problem in including C in the application, or do you think it would be cleaner to have a separate application that just referred to B?
You mean D?
You mean D?
D.
A separate
D, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry.
I think it makes it cleaner, including parcel C in with this. I mean, in hindsight, it should have been more clear a year and a half ago that the subdivision we were looking at was being split off from A, rather than looking at it just as itself. So I think doing this is the proper thing. It's clearly making C separate from the rest of the campus.
Well, excuse me, and also, given our desire to have them consider deed restricting Lot 1, to speak to you, Ed, for a betting man, I would say that we'll be back here in a year or two with a further conversation to split Lot 1 into 2 more lots. Just thinking ahead and want to kind of see everything out on the table would be my preference. I understand your position, though.
But I think as to Lot 1, we can't do that right now because you said that the building would intrude on a setback basis. So until the building's torn down.
It would only work if the building's torn down or if a variance was obtained.
So you really can't subdivide it now?
Correct.
Unless, there was a variance, okay.
And I think that's what we were saying to one of the residents, that's the kind of comments we can make, that legally, this is a by right subdivision, it fits the zoning, but the comments we can make going forward, the commissioners, is parcel C should be strongly considered for open space. If not considered for open space, the tree, as we talked about a year and a half ago, must be considered in any kind of development, and I'm sure Shade Tree, we can involve in that also. And the other part of that would be, if somebody would like to make that recommendation, that parcel D, Lot 1, would be strongly considered to be deed restricted, so be no more subdivision. But we can only strongly suggest that. They're the kind of comments we can make, whoever asked that question.
So I have another question. Is there a mechanism at all where we can maybe negotiate, so to speak, with the academy, and in return for maybe giving them a little more relief in some other locations, they would in turn donate Lot C and make it open space, so as to, I'm not trying to take money from the academy, so as to net them out whole or darn close to whole or something like that. Is there a means of doing that?
The one thing I was thinking, Steve, is I'd actually rather see 3 separate lots on parcel D and keep parcel C open, because the likelihood is that house is probably going to come down and they will come back before us and they will want a separate parcel or lot, on parcel D. What risk do we have delaying this application, Dan? This is the first time we're seeing it tonight, correct?
Yeah, you have the ability to table this.
And how much time do we have until we have to make a decision?
You would have to make a decision at the next planning commission meeting, March 1st.
There's just too much going on here for me to feel comfortable approving this plan tonight. Because I think there's likelihood is that we could, to Steve's point, potentially encourage the academy to look at this in total, and maybe they don't lose anything, but they're able to keep a parcel undeveloped, which seems to be what the neighbors are looking for. And it hopefully avoids us coming back to you and saying, we want to see your master plan before we vote on this. I mean, I think you know, we've had other applications by other universities and other institutions pushed and forced upon us, and we've never had the ability to say, you owe us a plan, which apparently you don't have current, or it hasn't been updated. So anyway, my suggestion would be to table it tonight and then maybe look at how you could reconfigure parcel D.
I think that my only concern with a reason for perhaps wanting to table it tonight is that I'm not completely comfortable making a recommendation without an official submission showing the lot line between Lot 1 and Lot 2 as, I don't want to make a recommendation that we approve or disapprove, you know, a property and then say, except move that line over 14 feet, because even though I completely, you know, trust Dave and believe that those numbers will work out, we don't have the numbers.
We could withdraw that portion if that would help facilitate getting it approved tonight. We're just trying to accommodate the neighbor. In fact, we have a plan here today that shows that line moved.
Yeah, and I think what you're doing was nice, and we certainly don't want to penalize you for trying to do something nice for a neighbor. My concern, I guess I would very strongly encourage you to see if there's something that we can help you with the rest of the plans here that's not egregious, that would help offset the cost to you to donate Lot C. If it's not possible and you come back and you say it's not possible, but I'd like you to try to see if you could come up with something that, you know, that we wouldn't have to, not too many variances, but that we could kind of help you out, even if, and I'm maybe going over my bounds, but even if we had to help you out on Lot B somehow, to try and offset this.
I'd like to ask a few questions about Lot B. What are your intentions now with respect to Lot B, or Parcel B? Dan, help us out here. It looks like you've got two auxiliary structures that straddle the county line, right?
Yeah, parcel B doesn't exist. We brought and showed it on the plan, trying to create it. And the reason for that was it just seemed logical that when we were doing the residence on Fairston Road, that we include that and make that as a separate parcel. And
Parcel B, is Parcel B now part of A?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Everything under the tax parcel numbers is parcel A, with the exception of two different townships.
Dan, very quickly if you can, what are the options with respect to B? Could they move, they could go to Tredyffrin and get a lot line behind those structures?
Well, I think it's note 3 on the plan says that in order to sell the lot, they would raise the house to the left and the garage. My suggestion was they either don't put the line in or they shift the line back approximately 40 feet into Tredyffrin. That would give them the rear yard setback necessary so that the lot would be conforming. It would have two houses on it. That yellow structure to the left is a house.
If they move the line, they'd have to go to Tredyffrin to move that line into the Tredyffrin portion.
Yes.
And then would the resulting lot be large enough to subdivide as far as Radnor were concerned?
Ooh, I don't know how that would work with a chunk of it being in Tredyffrin.
Is it
I would
already
think
big
it would
enough
be
now?
subdividable.
You think it would be subdividable?
It's already 43,000 now.
It's only what?
It's already 43,000 square feet now.
The one thing I'd like to point out to the board is apparently this was two lots at one time that was combined, so it is probably theoretically feasible to subdivide it again.
All right, so what you're saying is it's not impossible to move that line north into Tredyffrin and then create another two lots.
To facilitate your thinking, we've withdrawn it.
Pardon me?
To facilitate your thinking, and the discussion,
We've
withdrawn it.
You've already drawn it.
Withdrawn.
Oh, you withdrawn it.
Having
Yeah,
parcel B created.
you've withdrawn it now, but you could come back.
Then you can talk about it then?
Well, that's exactly the point we've all been making. The
But I
point
mean,
we've been
we could make a lot more lots out of the whole parcel, the
Well-
whole entire school.
Well, yeah,
They-
of course you could, but the point that we've been making, or others have made, is that when you come back in piecemeal, we don't see the full picture. We don't know. We're tempted to ask you, tell us now what your discussions are with Cabrini regarding Cabrini buying part of your property. Now, you may not want to be able to tell us, you may not want to. It may involve the area up near the ball fields and the St. David Golf Club, and it may have little or no impact, but it may have a bearing on it. And we may be back here, as we have with Eastern, and as we have with other institutions, a year from now. And the neighbors will say, a year ago, this happened, and the year before that happened. And the neighbors all know this because they participated in that exercise in the past. So I don't think it's unfair for us to consider what the possibilities are with Parcel B, because you could be back here in a year with a proposal to subdivide what is identified here as Parcel B with the idea of selling it and having another house on that parcel. It may be true that there was a house there some years ago, but I think all the residents of Ferriston Road would like to know whether there's a possibility there might be another house there. So can you shed any light on your intentions
I
now?
don't think I can, because there are none.
Okay.
You know,
Well-
like I said, we withdrew B because we figured, you know, it was a conflict, there were some problems, and it wasn't worth the trouble because there isn't any
All right.
intention to sell that parcel B. That
Well, I'm not
that property.
suggesting you do have plans, I'm just
And if-
responding to
and
the
if in
point of the
future it
relevancy of it.
changed, you know, or it changed, then we'd have to come back and do this very same thing, and you'd have the benefit of the history of the fact that we were here, you know.
Right.
I don't know what else to tell you, I mean.
Dan, have you had a chance to look at the section of the ordinance on the annual, the strategic plan or?
Well, it's 3.5 pages long.
No, well, then don't read it. I have one question. If an institution formally adopts by its governing body, something in the nature of a strategic plan, as all institutions do, is it a requirement that that strategic plan be filed with the township? Do you know? And don't.
I don't believe that the word strategic plan is in here. Basically, I'll read you 2 paragraphs. Each application for land development plan approval or application to establish a planned institutional district to any property not already in the district shall be accompanied by a submission to the township, a current institutional long-range development plan. And then the next one, item 2, upon submission of initial institutional long-range development plan, thereafter at intervals of 2 years, each educational, religious, and similar institutional establishment, and blah, 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 shall submit its institutional long-range plan.
Dan, I had a quick question. You said that the existing plan was lacking a narrative and was dated 2008.
Yes.
So what's the anniversary of 2 years from 2008?
Well, I would have to check the date when it was submitted, so it would be 2 years after it was submitted.
But it's 2010, so it's
Right. It was
now.
the summer of '08. It's been about 18 months since the last plan was submitted.
The plan has a date of June on it, so it would
June,
have been
okay.
submitted after that time. So it'd be June of 2010 at the earliest, but it was probably submitted later than that.
Right.
Okay, so would anyone like to make a motion on this application? To approve, to deny, or to stay for 30 days?
Make a motion, we stay the plan for 30 days.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, all opposed? We'll stay for 30 days. Thank you, guys. All right, next, Dan. Back to our floodplain. Can I ask that everyone that's leaving, just do it quietly, please? We can continue the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, I hope everybody read it this time. I know it was right around Christmas and New Year's, so there were other priorities. But basically what we have here is a revision to our existing floodplain ordinance. This was mandated because FEMA updated the plans in Radnor Township. And as part of that update, they also mandated that some of the language be upgraded as well. So just to kind of go over things quickly, page 1 through 4 are some changes, mostly additions to the different definitions that apply inside the ordinance. Probably, I see the one thing that's removed is the reference to mobile homes. That's now being referred to as a manufactured home or manufactured home park. One of the probably the bigger issues that stands out in my mind is on page 5 under section 28075, which talks about the designations of the floodplain conservation district. It's the underlined 3 sentences or 3 lines that is now the new definition, where before it was everything below it. The biggest change there is if you look in the bracketed area right below A, about the 4th line down, it says, in addition to the floodplain conservation district shall be defined to include all areas not shown on the map, which by hydrologic profile analysis are calculated to be inundated during the 100-year frequency flood. So previously the language was the floodplain shown on the maps plus anything that by hydrologic study indicates would flood during the 100-year storm. So that second part has been removed. So that I'm on page 5, just under A, 28075A. It's actually bracketed, so it's being removed. 4th line down at the end of that sentence after it says FEMA, starts with in addition. So in many instances, what we've had in the past is someone comes in and it's not shown on the map as a floodplain. Like on this map here, you can see there are some areas along the edge where it gets narrow. That's, well, here's a neighborhood. So you can see right along the back of the homes on Hunt Road along Darby Creek, there's a distinct line where it ends. But the reality is there may be an area, a low area that does flood. If someone came in for land development or even a grading permit that they wanted to build something back there, my normal practice is to go out, look at the property, and try to make a determination, does the floodplain line agree with what I'm seeing in the field? Having this language in there basically gives me the ability to say, I have a concern that this addition is going to be in the floodplain. By taking that out, I feel I'm being a little hamstrung, because if it's not shown on the map, the language says it's not in the floodplain. So that's probably my biggest concern after going through the language. Some of the other things were really some adjustments that FEMA now wants. If you go to page 6, or really page 7, there's a number of specific things that used to be lumped under water lines and sanitary sewers. Now that's being broken out into other utilities, placements of buildings and structures, anchoring. Even page 8 goes into more things, talks about paints and adhesives, electrical components and equipment. If you jump over to page 9, under 28077, prohibited uses, item number F really is talking about no expansion or enlargement of an existing structure shall be allowed within a regulatory flood elevation area
that would, together with all the other existing and anticipated development, increase the 100-year flood elevation by more than 1 foot at any point. So just to give you a little diagram. So this is showing, now this is showing some of the language that's been removed. You know, we have floodway, flood fringe, and together is the 100-year floodplain. So basically what is allowed is you're allowed to fill in the flood fringe to a certain point where you do not raise the water elevation by more than 1 foot in the floodway. So this language is talking about you can't raise it more than 1 foot together with all other existing and anticipated development. So it's very similar to the language that was in there before. Just gets a little dicey to try and figure out, you know, will there ever be any development in the future in that area that would raise that by more than 1 foot?
Dan, in general, FEMA's asking us to modify this language.
Yes.
So if we choose not to, or to, you know, as you said, either add language or not add language, where does that put us from a liability point of view down the road?
Well, we're allowed to be more restrictive. We can't be less restrictive.
Okay, we can always be more, we can't be less.
Right. You know, and it's certainly something that I would run past the solicitor if that's the direction that the board wants to go.
So Dan, the language that you say is going to hamstring you, that would be an example of something that's more restrictive, and yet in this draft, we're taking that out.
That's correct.
So we'll leave that in, okay.
But what's the rationale for taking it out?
Well, that's the way it came from FEMA.
Okay, so this is FEMA's draft.
Yes, and our solicitor looked at this, and some people on his staff looked it over, but it was something that jumped out at me after reviewing it that caused me a concern.
Okay. I just want to say publicly, and Dan and I talked about this, my home is now impacted by the new FEMA maps, and Planning Commission didn't make the maps, but the ordinance will impact my home, and I just wanted to put that out there as we go through this. Thank you.
Dan, can we adopt this and just add a rider to it?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, if that's the direction, you know, if the board feels that language should be included back in, then that would be the recommendation that I would forward on to the commissioners.
And how does this get out to the public, either to those that are now affected, like Susan, or those that are no longer affected? Will they each get an individual notification that you are now in a floodplain or a flood zone, or you're no longer?
Well, that's a good point. Now, there's 2 comments I have with that. One of the comments from Delaware County is basically to do that, is to make notice and let everybody know that there have been changes and they should contact their insurance carrier. They may be affected. And another comment that came up when it was introduced at the Board of Commissioners was that if there's any work proposed or any development proposed that would impact the floodplain, that the residents in the immediate area would be notified by the township through a letter, basically like we do with zoning and subdivision. So neither one of those are really in the ordinance, so certainly notifying the residents should be included in the ordinance. But to follow up on what Delaware County had suggested, I have a letter drafted that has not gone out yet because I'm trying to make sure I hone in on the properties that are in the area. And part of the problem is that if you go to FEMA's website, this is what you see. Well, this does anybody who lives next to the stream no good. There's no houses shown. It's very difficult. So what I've done is I have overlaid the FEMA floodplain maps, which I don't know if they're showing up, but there's a blue line here. I'm not sure if you can see that on your monitors. And then there's 2 black lines over here. Well, the blue line is what we have under the old maps. The first black line is the 100-year floodplain, and in this neighborhood, the second black line, the one further away from the stream, which is here,
is the 500-year floodplain. So the people who live on this section of Hunt Road, they are seeing the floodplain line coming closer to their homes.
Well,
Now,
let's talk about the two homes that are down at the bottom, where your pen point was pointing.
this one?
That's not showing up.
We can't see it.
Move up, move
Oh.
up. Yeah, those two, no, down, the other side of the road, right? Those two. It's rather obvious there that the new drawing brings the floodplain into their backyard.
It brings it further into their backyard.
Okay.
I mean, there's the stream over here.
All right. Okay, well, let's just, stick with that for a moment. It brings it further into their backyard, so what, in fact, it nearly touches the second house.
Correct.
So what is and the house next to it?
Yes, and as you go up.
And the pool, and so on and so forth. So let's review the practical effect of that is. If they wanted to build an addition, what's the effect?
They can't build an addition.
Whereas
Unless it's supported above the ground. It cannot, looking at this scale, they can't put anything in their backyard. Anything they put in their backyard could impact the floodplain. Something at grade, like a swimming pool, is not going to change the floodplain elevation, but putting a structure that's going to cause the water to hit it, run around, and possibly raise the floodplain elevation would be prohibited.
Dan, what are all the impacts? So, as I read this ordinance very carefully, all the different impacts on my home now. That line that you're seeing in the back on these homes is now, about 10 feet in front of my house. So my entire home is in the floodplain now. As I read the ordinance and the various things that are now restricted and what we can and can't do, it didn't specifically state it applies to new construction or old construction. So I understood, I can't now build an addition to my house that would change the footprint of my house. I could do an addition above, second floor addition. But all the other various things in here, putting in a new heater and painting my basement, all those types of things. I really tried to read this from a practical standpoint of I'm a Radnor resident, I'm going to get this letter saying I'm in the floodplain now, and these regulations are quite substantially changed. What kinds of impacts there?
Well, the basement needs to be flood-proofed. If the home is found to be in the floodplain, then under the guidelines, and there's a lot more than what's just in here, there's the whole building code that addresses flood-proofing, but the basement needs to be flood-proofed so that that exactly does not happen. The electrical panel needs to be so high off the ground so that if the basement floods, the electrical panel's not underwater and causing someone to be electrocuted. There's things more practical than the types of paints, but as you pointed out, paints and adhesives are addressed.
So I have to proactively change those things in my home if I'm a homeowner, or if I want to go do something, I'm going to have to make those changes?
It would be if you were going to do something, but if you are aware of it and you have a concern, you should do it now. It may impact your flood insurance rates.
Okay, so this is all in the context of getting flood insurance?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Now, but let me just follow up to what you were saying. One of the other things is, the way your backyard is, it's flat, and then your house is elevated. You have a little hill in the back where your house sits up higher. The reality is that actually might be where the floodplain line is. That's how it was when the house was developed. The idea was your immediate backyard where it's elevated is not in the floodplain, but once you go down the little hill, that is.
Right.
So if you wanted to put an addition on, or maybe it's worth your while to have an engineering study done to prove or disprove that you are not in the floodplain, then that information would be forwarded on to FEMA.
Right, that was all that other wording I read in here.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
there's a letter of map amendment, a LOMA, where you can go and prove through engineering calculations that you are not in the floodplain, thereby you do not need to purchase flood insurance.
Dan, do you believe these this new, the new maps are, substantially more accurate than the old ones?
Substantially, huh?
Okay, how about more accurate?
I have seen areas where they do make more sense. I have seen areas. Now, there are streams that are completely left off now. So, it's, I don't know if I have a good example. Well, yeah, I have one that's not the aerial photograph. This is on Gulf Creek Road at County Line. There's a stream that runs through here. That has been completely left off because it's such a small drainage area. FEMA said, we're not going to count it anymore. So the floodplain maps have changed on this side on Gulf Creek, and this tributary to Gulf Creek has been left off. So anybody who happens to live up here benefits because now FEMA says they're not in a floodplain. Well, I don't know if that's necessarily true. So, I mean, that stream still can flood. It's probably not significant, but it still could flood.
Is it incumbent on the township, if you looked at this and saw glaring errors, is it incumbent on the township to take some action as a township?
Yes, yeah, I would certainly communicate with FEMA that I feel that there is a problem here. I have not seen that when I compare it to what we have been using and what I'm seeing now. This is not, it's hard to see. Back to this aerial photograph, if you look across the stream, there's areas where it's better and it's worse. Like right here, as you get close to Darby Paoli Road and Goshen Road, the existing line is here, but the new line is back here. So they have narrowed it as you get closer to Goshen Road, and they've widened it as you get to Bryn Mawr Avenue. So Bryn Mawr Avenue that area is very flat, where up towards Goshen Road, it's kind of narrow. So it does make sense, what I'm seeing. It should be more narrow up here as you get closer to Goshen. So, I do see things that, in my mind, make some sense. So back to the ordinance. So if you go to page 10 at the top, another area that has me a little, I'll say confused. They talk about fills, and they say that a fill has to be at least extend 15 feet out. I think that really overkill. I mean, it doesn't say how deep it has to be. It just says extend 15 feet. So in my mind, I need a little more clarification, because are you talking about adding 6 inches of fill, but 15 feet extended out, or really it only needs to be 6 inches by 2 feet? I mean, I could see if you're filling something 30 feet or 15 feet, it needs to be 15 feet. I don't know where they came up with this.
But
Certainly the rest about the rocks and compacting properly so nothing washes away makes perfect sense. But item number 1 doesn't make sense to me.
But Dan, don't we have to include that?
Well, I have to find out to give you an honest answer. It just seems, I just don't understand the thinking behind that. And dropping down to number 6, this is another comment that the Delaware County had where they're talking about variances. So the underlined portion is the addition under 280-81A. No variance shall be granted for any construction, development, use, or activity within the regulated flood elevation area that would, together with all other existing and anticipated development, increase the 100-year flood elevation by more than a foot. So same language we saw earlier, but now this gives the zoning hearing board, a little more, something else to sink their teeth into to try and control development in the floodplain.
Dan, is it a standard, the not allowing any increase in elevation over 1 foot? Is that 1 foot? Is that the standard?
Yes, that's the
That's-
language they've used for a number of years.
That's been on the,
Right. Everything else after that really is some language. I mean, we have a lot of Department of Environmental Resources. That phrase hasn't been used in 15 years, so we're fixing that, making it Department of Environmental Protection. And that's really...
Dan, where does, you know what I noticed missing in terms of the various construction is geothermal heat pumps, the piping that goes in the ground. Is that addressed anywhere here? I'm curious about the grant approval, the grant for the Willows. I don't know if the Willows is in the floodplain now or not, but I noticed the geothermal missing from the various definitions.
In general, that is all below ground and should not have any impact. There should be no change in elevation from before and after the geothermal wells were installed. So that should have no impact on any floodplains.
Because the pipes themselves, the wells themselves are just not of a thickness to displace water significantly.
Well, everything's underground.
Right, no,
So
I know
the
that.
wells and the piping back to the various structures
Right.
are all underground. So the ground elevation should be put back to the same elevation it was before the work started.
I was thinking of so in all these definitions, when they talk about displacement of water in a foot, you're talking about physical structures above ground that will displace the water, not anything below the ground that might displace it from below.
Yes.
Therefore, because you know the high water table where we are.
Right.
It doesn't cover that.
Yeah, so it's more
Okay.
of this picture that they're talking about, encroachment. So they're filling in the floodplain or building a house, a shed, or a garage. So they're the types of obstructions. And that's really, they're the things that are jumping out at me.
And where are we timing-wise on this, Dan?
Well, there's really no timing. I mean, it's something I'd like to get moving. I did have a phone call from FEMA, I guess 2 weeks ago, asking where things stood. So they're a little anxious for us to get things finalized and signed off and forwarded on to everybody. So there is no timing, but as long as it's moving through the process, I don't think FEMA has an issue.
Dan, this doesn't impact the riparian buffer ordinance or
No,
language that we have?
no, the riparian buffer is a standalone in the zoning code. So this would be something that kind of coincides with it.
Right.
You know, where this floodplain width varies, our riparian buffer is a little more, it's 35 feet in R1 and institutional, and gets a little narrower in the more dense areas.
So it actually is more restrictive. Our code is more restrictive.
It would depend. I mean, some places the floodplain is very wide, so it would be much, like in this area, you know, it's much more than 35 feet from the top of the stream bank.
Right.
So in this case, the riparian buffer is not as restrictive as the floodplain ordinance.
But as it relates to development or mowing or any of that other?
Well, the riparian buffer does come into play with trying to keep the area more of a natural.
Right.
You know, where we have shrubs and tall grasses and trees to shade the stream. That's addressed in the riparian buffer, where this is not addressing those types of things.
Okay.
So Dan, back to Steve's idea, which I thought was a good one. Are you comfortable then with the changes that they're proposing and then just writing a rider that would have all of the adjustments or modifications to that language?
I have no problem tweaking the language and bringing it back to you next month.
Okay.
I mean, then we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
I mean, I have no problem with that.
Okay.
Who else has to look at it, or should look at it? Or
Well, it's
whose
going to go to the
comments are you-
solicitor. Ultimately, it's the Board of Commissioners that approve it. It goes to Delaware County, and then it goes to FEMA. So FEMA's going to want to look at it.
Has Delaware County looked at it already?
Yes. Yeah, and they're the comments
Okay.
that really talked about notifying
But
everybody.
they're done with their comments.
Yes, but if we change the language, it goes back.
And the solicitor is done?
He's looked at it.
the one time and giving it to me. And some of the questions I brought up tonight are questions that I either have talked to him briefly about or need to talk to him some more about.
Okay. And you would take this language to FEMA now or not till it's fully
No,
approved?
I would wait till it's
Wait
signed
till it's
off.
all done?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Dan, how many, you were telling us last month when you introduced this, how many homes are negatively impacted by this?
Well, I don't know. There's about 700. I created a buffer around the streams, and I had about 700 homes that are within I think it was 100-foot on one side or the other. So a 200-foot buffer of the stream, and I got about 700 homes.
So in looking at any, I know this isn't exactly this board, but in looking at any costs associated with notifying all those residents and information, for instance, we don't have flood insurance. When we bought the house, we weren't in a floodplain. So it's all new to us. Is there any federal money, state money, whatever, to underwrite? There's going to be costs associated with the township to notify different residents, and that's a large number of residents. I don't know who would be the one to look for some money to help cover that.
I'm not aware of any funds out there for that, and the reality is the amount of paperwork involved and time spent to try and cover the postage would be offset very quickly with federal paperwork. It's as bad as you can imagine.
Okay.
I'd have to check. To be honest with you, I don't know. I did not look into it, so it's worth checking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think I was clear. I started to say that part of the letter is the fact that this is what you see at the FEMA's website, which gives you very little information. So part of my letter is going to tell people that, they can come in and look at our aerial photographs with the new floodplain and see if they are impacted. That's certainly the first step, and that's something they can do. They need to come into the building. It's not something we have online. So hopefully a number of people can look and say, hey, I'm close. I need to explore it some more. I'm in it. I need to really explore it, or I'm pretty far away. I don't need to worry. So that's going to be part of what's in my letter.
Okay.
You may want to try a public hearing as opposed to getting them one by one. It'll kill you.
Well, I'm going to put it on Sue's computer that's at the counter, and hopefully we'll just leave it run and tell them to type their address in, and it'll take them right to it.
So we're going to leave in that more restrictive language, right? The stuff that gives Dan his judgment on page 5?
Yes.
In your draft, you'll keep that in there?
Yes.
Good, okay.
So do we need a motion, Dan, to stay this another month, or just?
No, I don't think
It'll be
so.
part of the
No.
plan?
Yep.
Put on next month's agenda and
It'll be on
have
next
Dan's
month's
come.
agenda.
All right, good. Thank you, sir.
approval.
For approval. Thank you, sir.
Great, thank you.
All right, couple of minor administrative things. I need a motion to reapprove or reappoint Doug McCone as our liaison to the Shade Tree Commission. He has volunteered to do that again. May I have a motion?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. And also Julia Hurl to the Open Space Advisory Committee. This is your first appointment, right, Julia?
Yes.
May I have a motion for that?
So moved.
And a second? All in favor?
Aye.
And that motion carries. Any old business? Any new business? I think for new business, Dan, can we make a note to ask by next month's meeting? Dan, for next month's meeting, can we get a list of the institutional developments that we have here in Radnor Township and the last time we got their plan, and we can look at those with a hard date? Maybe a good idea since this comes up time for time. So let's show that for Mark for next month when he gets back. If anyone is way out of the 2-year mark, we can go to them and ask for it now and ask to see an update. So I'll put that on the new business agenda.
That's fine.
Anything else?
Does that mean we'll see
I think we
actual
skipped item
copies?
6.
No, what I'm asking Dan to do, just give us a list and say Villanova, we last saw it June 2008. We should see it again this June,
Is it something we could actually just look at?
Yeah, their plans are available in the township if we want to look at it. If there's anyone in particular we want to see, we can certainly ask Dan to present it to us.
I meant that 2-year document. That probably
That's
doesn't.
They're here in the township, if you ever,
Okay.
It's a public document.
yeah, public document if you want to see it.
Okay.
Anything else?
Ed, yes,
Go ahead,
actually,
Matt.
we skipped item number 6, a vacancy on the
Oh, I did, I'm
Environmental
sorry.
Advisory Committee.
So we are looking for a volunteer. Mark would like a volunteer to do that. I don't know if I have one tonight. If not, think about it, and you can talk to Mark between now and next month's meeting. Hopefully, we'll have a candidate. Anything else? Motion to adjourn? Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everybody.